Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to join today. And a big thank you to Product School for inviting me to speak. I'm very excited to be here talking to you about something that I feel very passionate about, which is building a collaborative team environment. My name is Katherine Mann, and I'm a senior product manager at HubSpot. I work on the developer hub, which is making it easier for external developers to build on our platform and help millions of organizations grow better. Previously, I worked at companies like Athena Health and Tripadvisor. My journey into product management is actually considered rare in that I was very lucky and got a chance to do it straight out of school after college. I had an internship previously with Athena Health doing market research, and I had no idea what I wanted to do next. And I talked with the director, and he pitched me on product management by saying, if you don't know what you want to do, you should try product management. You get to wear a bunch of different hats, and through that, you can try to figure out what you like to do. I was completely sold and made it a very easy decision. And 5 years later, I am still here loving what I do. A quick disclaimer. I'm here live. I'm not a cat. But most days, I do feel like a potato. In my free time, I like to box and dance salsa. The latter is obviously pre-COVID, RIP social interactions. And what I'd love to hear from you all is, what is the best team bonding activity you've ever done? So why don't you go ahead and put that in the chat, and I'll give it a couple seconds. Yeah, I see some great ones. Nice. Here's mine. I was incredibly lucky that when I was at Tripadvisor, I had the opportunity when I was joining a new team to go with them to Sydney. They already had this trip planned, and I managed to talk my way onto it, as well as get my designer to come along as well. And the ultimate team bonding activity was climbing the Sydney Bridge together. So there's nothing like bonding when you're thousands of feet dangling in the air. While this isn't very reasonable for most teams to be doing, this did prove to me the power of how powerful it was to build out all of that bonding. And we did some really great work together after. But later on, I will give you some more reasonable examples of things that you can do to bond with your team. Today, we'll go through the 3 key roles of a cross-functional team, why collaboration is important, how to build a collaborative environment, and along the way, I'll tell success and fail stories. Different companies will call these different things, but cross-functional teams usually have 3 key roles. There's the product manager, the designer, and the engineer. To make it easy, I summarize each of them up into one word. The product manager owns the why. They explain to the team why we're working on a project, why it has the top priority. The designer owns the user experience with things like what are we building, what does it look like? And the engineer owns the technical design, the how. They're telling us how it'll actually be built. And the 3 all work together on building our solutions. Why is collaboration important? Numerous studies talk about why it's important. Every single time, collaborative teams will outperform non-collaborative ones, such as 87% of the time, they're making better decisions. Those decisions are twice as fast, and they're getting 60% of the time better results, which is super compelling. Something that's not reflected on here and isn't quantifiable is there's also the factor that it's just much more enjoyable. And that's the reason that I feel very passionate about collaboration, is that you both get better results and it's a lot more fun. In addition to collaboration, relationship building is also very important. I've worked with 16 different teams across 3 companies, and every time I've had to reestablish myself and build relationships with new team members. When you're working at a mid to large size company, this is something that happens quite often because of reorgs. Is this familiar to you all as well? Let me know in the chat. Yeah, looks like it is. Let's get into why you're here today. How do you actually build a collaborative team environment? First, you start off with establishing trust, then fostering inclusivity, empowering your team members, over-communicating, and asking for frequent feedback. As you can see here, and we'll go through these, it is a very deliberate thing that you have to do. Building a collaborative team environment isn't just a natural thing that happens. So let's jump into each one. Establishing trust. Establishing trust is incredibly important when you first start out with a team, whether it's a new team that's being formed or you're the only new member as a product manager who's joining the team. Something that we used to say at Athena Health that I really liked was to always assume positive intent. What it basically means is give people the benefit of the doubt. When you establish trust, it makes it very easy to do that. An example of this would be if someone messes up, Instead of thinking something like, oh, they're always messing up, they're always dropping the ball, instead you'll think, I know that they're very busy. Is there any way that I could help them out? And the way that you can do this is you could start out by getting to know people on a personal level. You can do things like pre-COVID, you could do things like grabbing lunch. Nowadays, you can do virtual coffee chats. It's just a chance for you to get to know each other on a personal level. You can talk about work if you want to. You don't have to talk about work. But if you get a fuller picture of someone and who you're working with, there's a higher chance that you'll work better together. Continuing that, even after you've had your one-on-ones, do things like organizing team lunches, have social outings and games. During COVID times, you can schedule virtual lunches on a somewhat recurring basis. I would say, though, just be mindful that everyone is suffering from Zoom fatigue these days. So you might want to do it at a less frequent cadence. For example, one of my teams does monthly. Near the beginning, it's good to schedule a 1-hour team best practices meeting. The goal of this meeting is to create a document that captures all the best practices that you all agree to. And I started this last one, which is to understand what processes the team currently has. This one is really important. It's actually one of the biggest learnings that I had when I was relatively new at a company and I first joined. I was very eager, and made a mistake that most new people do make, which is you're so eager to prove yourselves that you start making suggestions before you've even had a chance to really understand how the team is currently working. In my case, I noticed that the team had a bit of a lack of structure because I was coming from a very formal Scrum environment. And off the bat, I was making all these suggestions of things I thought we could change. Luckily, I got very timely feedback that it was a bit disruptive to be doing that and to maybe take a step back and try to see what the team already had in place. Once I did that, I found that they were working totally fine and it made sense for what they were doing. It was just more of a Kanban style than Scrum style. And it's one of those moments that you have to realize that the team was completely functioning before you even joined. And out of respect for the team, it's good to just look at what they're currently doing. That's not to say that you can't have suggestions, but make sure that you're taking the time to see what they're currently doing and then work together on those suggestions. A couple of don'ts. Don't assume everyone wants to be friends or hang out. This is a relatively new phenomenon in the younger generation. I know when I talk to my parents about being friends with people at work, they are incredulous. So this is one of those that during your best practices meeting, you can try to understand what is everyone looking for on the team. It's fine if they're there just to work. You can have a great working relationship even if you're not close friends. Extending that, also make sure that you're not pushing people to do social activities they're not comfortable with. This is the infamous culture bias in which you think things like, oh, well, I like working with people that I like, so I'm looking for people that I want to grab drinks with after work. If your team is grabbing drinks and someone doesn't want to do that, that's completely fine. They should be comfortable to say no. That's also why I like to suggest activities that everyone can do, like eating lunch, because everyone has to eat. Another thing to keep in mind and be mindful of is working parents. They usually have things going on after work. So if it's possible, try to schedule to do things during the workday with everyone's manager's permissions, of course. And here are some sample questions you can ask in a coffee chat, since sometimes people need some prompts. Things like, how did you get into your role? How did you find the current company? What projects did you work on that you enjoyed or disliked? What makes a good product manager? I like this one because this one specifically calls out how they see my role. How can we best work together? How do you enjoy, or what do you enjoy doing in your free time? How are you surviving COVID? And what are you looking forward to most post-COVID? Are there any other questions that you all like to ask? Feel free to drop them in the chat. Nice. And here is the team best practices meeting. Like I said before, the goal of this is to come away with a shared document that you can come back to and keep referencing, in which you talk through things like, how would you describe your working style? What are your normal working hours? What's your preferred communication style? What motivates you? What tools should we use as a team? Things like Google Docs, Slack, etc. What recurring team meetings should we set up? Things like daily stand-up, weekly planning. And then let's walk through our ideal project cycle. At what point would you like to be looped in? This one I find to be really interesting because designers and engineers can like to be looped in at different points in time. So it's always good to ask at the beginning. After you've established trust, you can move on to fostering inclusivity. And you can achieve that by giving everyone a seat at the table. At other companies, there can be a tendency for product management to be too top down. And so the first thing to do is to make sure that you're doing your problem solving sessions together. This is actually my favorite part of the job. It's not expected that a product manager should have all the solutions. That actually isn't our role, and we wouldn't come up with the best solution anyway. I like to joke that if I didn't have a designer, I would be putting the paperclip from Microsoft Office everywhere, in which case that's obviously not the best design. So I need my designers and engineers. And yeah, my favorite part of the job is that I bring a hard problem to the team. We go and have a meeting and we just try to figure it out. We come away with several proposed solutions and we're just asking each other questions, trying to figure out and challenge assumptions, problem solving, all that good stuff. And it's really important because you want to bring in your designers and engineers at the very beginning. This is the fatal flaw of the waterfall methodology, in which you bring them in too late. And the problem is that you end up having misunderstandings. You have different understandings of what the solution should look like, misunderstanding what the customer was actually looking for. So that's why it's really important that you walk away with a shared understanding. Another way to do this is by inviting your designer and engineers to your meetings with other product teams, stakeholders, and customers. Product managers are in a lot of meetings. I joke that most of my day is spent in meetings. And so what I like to do is I will talk with my designer and engineer, tell them about upcoming meetings that I have. If they're interested in any of them, I'll put them as optional. This is an effort to be completely transparent with them so they can see how business decisions are being made, give their input. And especially for the customers, it's really important, and a lot of engineers enjoy putting a face to the people that they're designing solutions for. As an example, at HubSpot, we just wrapped up a round of customer research calls, and our engineers were invited to every single one. Here's a cartoon that's commonly used to explain why it's important to have shared understanding. Starting in the top left, you see how the customer explained it, how the product manager understood it, how the UX designer designed it, and how the engineer wrote it. So clearly all of these are very different. And then here's one that my old engineers would think is very funny, is how the project was documented. I am notoriously not the best with documentation. And then finally, what you're seeing on the bottom right is what the customer really needed in the end was this tire swing. This is the old adage that customers don't necessarily know what they want. So it's really up to you and your team to figure out what is the true solution here and work together on that. Empowering team members. This is one of my favorite ones, in that I think HubSpot does a really great job at this. Like we were talking about earlier about partnership, something that HubSpot does and sets the tone right up front is your team has a triad, which is the product manager, designer, and engineer. What it means is that all three of you get to make important team decisions together. This isn't always the case at other companies. I know that even when I first started out, it was very confusing because manager can be in your title, but you're not a manager. And to be very clear, you are not the formal manager for your designers and engineers, in which case it should not be top down in terms of what you're telling them. Instead, you should be partnering with them and working very closely together and make sure that you're bringing them in on all the important decisions, having those team discussions together. Another way that I like to do this is by deferring design and engineering decisions to them so that they have the final say. Like I explained earlier, in terms of what each role owns, the UX designer should have final say over the user experience, and for the engineer to have final say over the technical design. It's not to say that you can't have disagreements and discussions about these things, but a lot of times the way I'll approach it is I'll say, hey, this is my preference, but I will defer to you in terms of what you think is best, because it's really, they are the ones who are the experts in their areas. If you do have discussions and questions do come up, and maybe you do disagree with an approach that was proposed, the best way to do that, and because you establish trust and you assume positive intent, is to ask questions. And this is for everyone. This isn't just for product managers to designers and engineers, but you can ask questions like, in this design, if I were the user, how would I complete this task? And you let the designer explain how to do it. And the key here is that you really need to keep an open mind, because even though you have your preconception about what you think it should be, you should be ready to have your mind changed. And there are many times that I went in thinking I had a strong opinion, but it turns out that the designer or engineer was completely right in terms of the approach. So it's that belief of have a strong opinion, but hold them very loosely. Like I said, this can happen in both directions as well. Since as a product manager, I'm supposed to bring the team priorities. If the team has an issue with those priorities, we will discuss that as well. And sometimes they change, which is completely fine. It's a team discussion. Especially during the pandemic, it's crucial to be over communicating. Slack is a great tool for this. I am constantly pinging my teammates. talking about things like business decisions. These are the things like I was saying about how a lot of times product managers are having these meetings separately. And while your designers and engineers might be invited to the meetings, they're not going to have time to make it all of them. In which case you should be bringing back things like, what is the ultimate company vision and how does your team fit into that? Why are things prioritized in the way that they are? Updates from leadership. This is across the entire team. You report up through different leaders, you're hearing different things. And it's really important that you're just sharing that information so that everyone is in the loop. HubSpot is really big on transparency, so they're really great at doing company-wide announcements. But even within the team, sometimes information flows differently, so you just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And they always appreciate when you ping them with an update. Feedback from stakeholders. If you're in meetings and you're hearing feedback, as a product manager, oftentimes you're the one who are bringing back either these additional requirements or feedback on your proposed solutions, in which case you bring back that feedback, and then as a team, you can discuss how that'll impact the solution and update it based on that. A lot of times there will be questions from the team that come out from any of these things. They'll ask me questions to clarify, and hopefully I'll have the answer, but if I don't, that's completely okay. I need to know the right person to go and ask though and get that answer. Once I have the answer, it is really important to follow up with your teammate just so you're being held accountable and being responsible and showing that you follow through. And the last step for all of this is to ask for frequent feedback. This is to just make sure you're checking in with the team and that everything is going okay. Things like you can do monthly team health check-ins. This is where you're focused on each other as team members and not necessarily the projects at hand. A lot of times we're in our meetings and we're hard at work, so we don't think about just asking each other like how you're doing. So this is something that can be done quickly. It doesn't have to be a whole thing, but it's good to keep in the back of your mind. For formal projects though, you can do what are called project retrospectives at the end of big projects. This is when you go through what went well, what could have gone better, and what changes need to be made for the next time. The goal here is definitely not to point fingers and point blame. A lot of times if something went wrong, that person usually steps up and owns up to it. But it's a good conversation to have to reflect on how you're working together and any improvements or changes that need to be made to make it even better later on. Most companies also do formal performance reviews. If you feel like you need a more formal forum to get that feedback, you can ask your manager to collect that feedback from your team. Hopefully though, since you establish that trust amongst each other, you can just give that feedback directly to each other. But if you feel the need to have it anonymized, you can do that as well here. To summarize, how to build a collaborative team environment: start with establishing trust, then foster inclusivity, empower your teammates, over-communicate, and ask for frequent feedback. And here are some virtual team bonding ideas. Here are ones that I've done because I know that the name of the game has changed, going fully virtual. Things like a scavenger hunt. This is where someone puts together a list and you all compete against each other. One that we did was, so you'll do something like bring the most expired thing that you have in your fridge, which yes, I know is very gross, but the good news is that you end up throwing it away after, so I still think it's a win-win. But the person who comes back with the most expired item is the one who wins, and you keep track of points that way. It's fun, it gets you moving, especially when we're going stir crazy inside. It's great to just have some movement. PowerPoint karaoke is a really fun one where everyone gets 5 to 10 minutes to put together a slide deck of whatever they want, completely random. And then you rotate so that everyone has to present someone else's slide deck. And it's really funny, you have to do it on the fly. As an example, what I did, mine was a little bit cruel. I titled my presentation, My Most Embarrassing Story. So the person who then had to present on that had to just make something up. The box activity is something that I learned at HubSpot and I really, really like. It's really great for new team members, but you can do it with your existing ones as well. You take a box, a relatively big box. I know we've all been shopping on Amazon these days, so hopefully you have one of those lying around, and you fill it with things that have meaning to you. For me, I would put in something like my salsa dancing shoes. I would have my boxing gloves, a tennis racket, Nutella, because I have a crazy sweet tooth, as my friends know. And you present it to your team and you take out each item. And as you go through them, you explain why it has meaning to you. And it's a really great exercise and a great way to get to know each other. The talent show, you can show off your virtual talents. We did a company-wide one in which we ended up finding a developer who was very talented, and he was able to play any pop song essentially by ear on the piano. But you can just do this as a way to share out what you've been working on during your COVID time. And the last one is the traditional one, which is you could play online games together. Things like Pictionary, Codenames, and Among Us. It's very popular right now. And the last thing, if there's one thing that I would like you to take away from the presentation today, is that there is a new golden rule going around. And it's treat everyone how they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated. The focus here is that this really should be about understanding your teammates and what they're looking for. This is very applicable to both working life and personal life. But before, it was very focused on yourself versus now the focus is shifted. And it really will help you in terms of figuring out how to work best together, because if you're thinking about them and not yourself, then that will make for a much better team environment. And that's all I've got. Thank you so much for taking the time to join today, and have a great rest of your day. See you later. Bye.